Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT, Oro Muscles, and Firefly Recovery. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out isofit.com. Oro Muscles revolutionizes rehabilitation with real-time actionable insights into muscle activity with live biofeedback and instant analysis, which has made a huge impact in my work with athletes. For more on Oro, be sure to check out oromuscles.com. Episodes like this are made possible by Firefly, the official recovery provider of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. Today, I'm joined by Todd Bourgeois. Todd is a doctor of physical therapy in addition to a 9-time American Ninja Warrior competitor. You might know him as the Cajun Cowboy. Today, Todd and I dive into his journey in Ninja Warrior, relating to his training, his show appearances, and so much more. And we also talk about some of the injuries that he's faced and some of the incredible work that he's doing now in the healthcare space. I highly recommend you check out Todd and all the amazing things that he's doing. If you haven't already, you can check the description below for the links to everything that he's up to. Enjoy. Todd, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man. Shout out to our mutual friend, Jim Davis, for helping us get connected there, dude. But for people who aren't familiar with you, or maybe they've never seen that little TV show called American Ninja Warrior, 9-time appearances as the Cajun Cowboy that way. Would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the great things you've been up to, man?
Well, so I'm an athlete, but also a nerd. So I'm double doctorate. I have a doctorate of physical therapy and I have a PhD in health psychology. Been teaching at a graduate level program for over 15 years now. Fellowship trained in Orthopaedic Manual Physical Therapy, OCS, so Orthopedic Board Certified, and dabble in a lot of stuff now between teaching entry-level grad students to continuing education, teach a lot of dry needling courses, manipulation courses, building an empire there, and also releasing a product, a software now to help clinicians manage their clients better, from more of a concierge type viewpoint, because that's kind of how my practice goes. My private practice is more concierge athletes and, boutique, if you will, type approaches. But I've been an athlete for my whole life, but I was a collegiate pole vaulter, which is where I met Jim Davis. He was a coach and he trained with us. He was, like, what a great experience training with that whole crew. He came in with the Olympic training squad with a couple of his colleagues and just got an amazing, blast off as an athlete in college there, and then went straight into grad school from there and kind of lost, that competitive game because I wasn't competing anything. All I was doing was going to school. And while I was in my fellowship, they had some students ask me to do these obstacle course things with them because they're like, "Oh, you look pretty athletic. Like, you want to go?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's see what happens." And ended up like winning the whole thing, and then went on to another one. It was called a Metro Dash. It was just a kind of a cross mutation of obstacle course racing and CrossFit, and won like 3 of those in a row. And then they're like, "You should do the Ninja Warrior show." And I said, I don't even know what you're talking about because I'm a nerd. I don't watch TV. So they showed me what it was. They basically filled out the application for me. I was like, all right, let's see what happens. And then boom, that was I think season 4. It was still on G4 Network. It wasn't even on NBC at the moment in time. And I went down to Miami and competed, and I had a pretty bad experience, to be honest with you. It was, I'm used to showing up as an athlete, doing my thing, and being taken care of as an athlete. This was a production. I stood on the concrete for 8 hours before I actually got to go. So it was rad, and I was kind of upset about it. I ended up cutting my hand. There was blood everywhere, and I was like, this is crazy, But they aired that run, and I had no idea. And then they invited me back the next season, and that's when I made it to nationals because I went. And again, I was like, I don't know if I want to do this, but I went back, and then boom, that's when that kind of career took off and started competing, and then went off and into a little bit of a pro level ninja, and been doing it ever since. It's awesome.
That's awesome, man. I mean, you've got a ton of experience across a variety of different things that way, from your background in track and field, pole vault specifically, to, on the physical therapy side and the manual therapy education, to all the other stuff you're doing, now from a teaching standpoint, and then obviously throwing American Ninja Warrior that way. You're definitely a man of many talents, dude. Do you ever like sleep, or how do you have time for all these things, man? My goodness.
Yeah, it's pretty rad. I definitely I definitely get it from my father. Grew up as a farm boy in Louisiana. He just doesn't stop either. So I get it from him. I wake up and I'm moving, and I just one of those people who can't stop moving, until I pass out again. But I definitely sleep well, which is a good thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's interesting to me how it sounds like you kind of just found your way into American Ninja Warrior. It wasn't something you were really familiar with. It was not something that you had, planned for 20 plus years that way. You just sort of fell into that. And that's a theme that continues to come up when I talk with athletes about, their experiences or where they're at in life and so on that way. Is it kind of seems like the pieces just sort of randomly fall together one day and you kind of find yourself where you're meant to be. And, it kind of defeats a lot of times people have plans and then life kind of throws them a curveball and they end up in a totally different spot. But that position they end up in is often a lot better than they ever planned on originally, I would say.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I do remember reflecting on it whenever I won a few of those competitions, and I had no idea that that talent was there. And I just remember I was talking with a group of guys. It was kind of like this little Bible study, and they were just like, "What's going on?" And I was like, "You know what? I think I found something I'm good at." And it was just kind of like an experience. I remember that moment going, "Wow, like I'm actually good at this, and I didn't know it." You know?
Right. That's
It was really fun.
incredible.
And I'm no, by all means, I'm not a celebrity on the show, and I'm not like one of the big dogs, but I've been on the stage with the biggest names in the sport, and they know who I am, and I'm kind of more in the back scenes per se. I'm the dude who's like kind of treating the athletes because there wasn't a lot of support for the athletes, but I'll be treating the athletes in the background so people know who I am to help, and then I get on the stage and compete with them, and it's like, all right, here we go, this dude, you know. So
That's hilarious, man. I love that. And you mentioned about that background in pole vault, and I never did it myself, but one thing that I was always impressed by with that sport is the amount of body control and just overall kinesthetic awareness you need to have in order to do that at a competitive level. And I'd imagine, knowing what I know about pole vault and knowing what I've seen with American Ninja Warrior, there might have been a little bit of like a carryover or overlap there, if you will.
absolutely. Again, I'm not going to necessarily put it on myself too much, but it's a very interesting sport because it evolved where the athletes who begin were crossover athletes, meaning they were either a gymnast, a rock climber, a parkour athlete, and believe it or not, a lot of pole vaulters stepped into that sport that had some background. Jesse Graft, and there's another Jesse who these are top female athletes in the ninja sport. They were pole vaulters. There's a couple of the guys that were pole vaulters too at a high level. They collegiate or more. So there is a crossover there that married well with the obstacle course sport, and body awareness is one of them. And I'd say grit mindset is a huge piece of it. I mean, there's got to be a little bit something off in you. Now, I don't want to use the word off, but unique, let's say, to run as fast as you can, stick a 16-foot pole in the ground, and then go upside down on it, and just try to launch off of it. There's a lot of danger factors in there that you got to be able to get your mind right and block it away so that your nervous system will put full force into it. And ninja's no different. When you got to make a 8 to 10 foot lache, which is jumping with your hands and try to catch a fingertip grab, that's not a normal human thing to do. Maybe at one point in our lives we had to, or our existence we had to, but we don't normally do that every day. So I think that's where the pole vaulting really plays a role in the obstacles. It's that the mindset of kind of being, I'm gonna use the word ballsy, like you got to charge. And then obviously the upper body strength is going to help you quite a bit. But believe it or not, I don't think pole vaulting served me tremendously well with the fingertip grips. That's where the
Hmm.
rock climbers really excelled. They had such an upper hand on us on some of the particular famous obstacles that Ninja Warrior put, especially like stage 3, and when you're doing the national finals there, that they excelled. If a rock climber could make it to stage 3, we were all like, it was going to be a rock climber that's going to win this. But they had to get there because their normal athleticism doesn't really have a lot of agility and jumping and kind of stuff like that we were a little bit better at than them. So they just had to get there. And then that one season, I can't remember what season Isaac made it. He was finally we had an American win, beat all four stages, and it was a world class rock climber. He just crushed it once he got there.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And I've heard that and seen that before with rock climbers that way. And I was at a obstacle course race one time, and there was a rock climbing kid there. Like he was a younger guy, younger than me, and they had like a pull-up bar, and they were doing some kind of like competition with a pull-up bar, and he just crushed everyone. Like I was like, I can do weighted pull-ups and rep that out, but like I cannot hang pace with this guy, man. It's incredible what that sport prepares you for, but it's also incredible the overlap from other sports. You mentioned multiple athletes who have that background in pole vault are, now excelling in the American Ninja Warrior space that way. And I think that's something that I just continue to hear come up over and over again. Well, my kid's going to play lacrosse or my kid's going to play soccer. So we just got to put them in that sport and, start them early and just keep them in that lane. And it's like, no, get your kid involved with as many sports as you can. Like give them a wide movement vocabulary because you never know where they're going to end up. They might end up on American Ninja Warrior someday. You don't know. Give them a wide movement vocabulary so then they can solve whatever movement problem is presented to them with a variety of different strategies instead of just, only knowing one way, if you will.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm actually going to just quickly speak to that from what I'm currently seeing in the sport ninja, which is
Yep.
funny because I'm so OG in this sport that I was involved in the naming of our sport. you know, back when, Facebook groups were super popular and everybody's chatting away, like, what are we going to call this? It was American Ninja Warrior, but there's leagues that have spun off and there's a full-blown competition world. There's, I don't know, 4 or 5 leagues now. But what are we going to call this? And I got outvoted. I didn't actually want to call it ninja, because I feel like ninjas, people often ask me, do you fight people? And I'm like, no, we do obstacles. So I wanted to call it something like technical obstacle course racing or something of the sort. But anyway, we ended up voting on it and Ninja won. But what I was getting to with the younger population, because now this younger population has been watching us since they were 4 and 5 years old. They've seen us transitional athletes go into it, rock climbers, gymnastics, pole vault, they went into the sport and to do it. But these kids were watching us, stepped into a ninja gym when they were 4, 5, 6 years old, and now they're 15, 16 years old, and they are absolute animals. Like they're making us look completely like, ignorant, if you will, because they're so good at what they do. But as a physio and a movement specialist, I do have a concern about an athlete just getting in the gym and only doing ninja for that entire extent of their development. Don't get me wrong, it's going to produce a freak athlete and they're going to do really well at that sport. And ninja is if I had to choose one to do, I would choose ninja over gymnastics, believe it or not, because of the variety of athleticism and movements that you get in the sport of ninja. Now, what you don't get is that hand and eye coordination as much as like a ball sport or a team sport. Ninja is kind of not team oriented. So I do encourage families and who want their kids to be involved in the obstacle course racing to allow your kids to play other sports too. Like don't just focus on that one ninja gym. Get them out there, let them play some team sports and collaborate and do other things. There's very much so benefits to all of that. From a mindset to a physical coordination perspective. But man, I tell you what, I just competed this past September and I got invited back on the show. They're supposed to air it sometimes in either May or June. I don't know when. It was very clear the writing on the wall of how high the level of athleticism, because it's been about 3 seasons since I got back on the show. But I went on again this year, and these young kids are just phenomenal. I mean, they are some movement experts and they fear nothing. Their ligaments and tendons and everything have genetically expressed themselves to be able to do these motions at a higher level than what we were capable of doing. And they're really, really good. It's
Yeah,
pretty.
no, that's incredible, and it is something that I see with other sports as well, right? Is you definitely produce a freak athlete at that sport with the early specialization, and I don't think anyone can argue with that. It's just a question of is that good for that person long term? And I
Right.
don't think we know enough yet to really have that answered. But I do think we know that adding other novel movement stimuli is not going to do anything bad. It's not going to harm anyone in any way. So I think in general, adding a little bit more of different stimuli, it's not going to hurt us. It can only help us or keep us where we're at. And I'm willing to make that transaction personally that way. But, obviously part of that comes from sport. Some of that also comes from lifestyle. And I think people completely forget about that because a lot of people go around sitting down most of their day, working at a desk or sitting in school or whatever that way. But your upbringing was a little different. As you mentioned, you grew up on a farm in Louisiana, so I'm willing to bet you almost never, sat down on the day to day. There's always something to do. And I've seen that with other sports as well, especially football, is there's this sort of element, for lack of a better way to put it, I call it farm boy strength, where it's like you grow up doing some actual physical hard labor and it carries over into success for the rest of your life that way. And it's often nothing fancy, right? Like carrying stuff, moving from point A to point B, being on your feet for a long period of time. But that stuff has so much value and benefit. In fact, I think a lot of it has more benefit for the athlete than some of these fancy, crazy, sexy Instagram exercises I see put out every day. It's like, if you want to get stronger, just chop wood, carry water.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's definitely what I preach, and that's definitely what I practice. Keeping things somewhat simple and fundamental is going to go so far for pretty much any sport. Not all, but if you do the basics well and you have a good solid foundation, and I think form board strength is perfect. I think that's kind of a basic foundational thing. And then I've really, since I've dabbled in the world of psychology, and my PhD work is in positive psychology, flow states, and eustress and all that. And I'll explain that if you want to, but it's it's huge what a mindset will do. And I think that by being a worker or being someone who knows how to use your body continuously, and then you combine a good mindset with that, it really turns a potential athlete into that athlete who is successful. Whereas someone who has the potential may not have the right mindset. And I just think there's a combination of the physical and mental that we obviously we're jumping on it. There's plenty of programs to get the mindsets right. And but I think the belief system is huge. And if you don't believe it, it's crazy. And I can see the belief system, I mean, exponentially in the sport of ninja, because as we, again, over time, I've watched things happen. Like there were obstacles that were impossible, just couldn't do it. It was physically impossible. All the best guys were trying to do it. And then it's just like that, 4 minute mile phenomenon, where one person ran the 4 minute mile, and then that year, a few other people ran a 4 minute mile. But as soon as one athlete sees an athlete do an obstacle and they complete it, then boom, all of a sudden it's unlocked because now you believe it's possible. And so your human potential or your human physical capability is now unlocked, and it goes and it's able to do it. So I think those are key factors, when it comes to blending in the form board strength with getting to a high level athlete, and putting all those things together, which there's a lot, and I enjoyed all the things involved, between blood flow restriction training, coordination training, head and eye, motor coordination, stimulating your nervous system versus like brute strength training and lifting heavy stuff, which is all part of it. I love that whole puzzling together and seeing what one person needs to actually get them to that full potential.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that's exponentially more important in a sport like ninja because, as you mentioned, you might be out there waiting 6 to 8 hours to go compete. It might be dark, it might be nighttime. There's a lot of different variables and factors that go into the sport that I don't think most people consider that way. I mean, every time I've watched ninja, it's dark. I've never seen ninja done, at 2 p.m. in the sunshine that way. It's always dark. And you mentioned before, it's more of a production at times. And I'd imagine there's kind of a mental element that goes into that as well from, all these cameras pointing at you, all these people watching you in the moment that way, knowing that you're going to be possibly aired on television in front of, however many millions of people that way. It's like there's variables and factors in play there that I think most people don't even consider in the sport of ninja that way.
You nailed it, man. You absolutely nailed it. I honestly, for me, I think the hardest obstacle is the weight in that specific show, right? Where it is a competition, but it is a reality TV show. So you're at their beck and call. You're being called in for interviews. You got to go get on the sidelines for other athletes that you're friends with, or they want you there, and you're running all over the place. And before you know it, you checked in at 6 o'clock p.m. And this is actually what would just happen, but it's a common thing. Check in at 6 o'clock p.m. and I didn't compete until 5 a.m. and that was in Vegas time, so that's 3 hours ahead of my norm. So technically, I competed at 8 a.m. on my Eastern Standard Time. And my body was just freaking out, right? So that is to me in this show of American Ninja Warrior, the hardest obstacle is the weight, and then two, like you said, trying to block that choking under pressure because when you see all the cameras and the smoke machines and the fire going off and you're up on stage, you were cool, you finally were ready to go, you're all warmed up, and then all of a sudden your knees are shaking uncontrollably and you're like, what the heck is happening? There's cameras looking at me. You gotta freaking hit obstacle by obstacle and get through it. So that's a huge challenge on the show.
What's your remedy, if you will, for the wait time that way? Are you just kind of adapted at this point to pulling the all-nighter before competition, or how do you go about approaching that from your end?
There's a couple different approaches, and I've tried them both, and I've had the fortunate opportunity to try a few because I've gotten my shot a few times, and I haven't experimental control design documented it all, but it's just more anecdotal, if you will. So one approach that I tried was don't try to change your sleep cycle. Just go into it, get the right mindset. It's just tonight, maybe tomorrow night. If you make it through, you typically go 2 nights in a row. And just burn it down like you're gonna go out on the town. Sometimes you go out party and you can stay out till the sun comes up. It's just a great night. You're not really that exhausted. You just had a good time. So you can take that approach, and I think that was pretty good. Another approach is to start, a week and a half, 2 weeks before, and start staying up all night, actually training at 1, 2 a.m. to try to, acclimate your body to that time. And I think that was probably the better approach, especially for the athletes who are pretty comfortable in saying that you're going to qualify through a few rounds because you know that it's going to happen multiple times. So you might as well change and adapt your sleep cycle and get your body kind of ready to go at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, wake up, and be competitive from a physical perspective. So I've tried them both, and I think that the one that if you have the time and ability to acclimate, and change your sleep cycle is better. But if you have a career and you're working, during the day, it really is tough to take 3 weeks, if you will, of times changing your sleep cycle and all that good stuff. So that can be a challenge, especially for the working men. But plenty of the athletes now, that's their full-time gig. They work in a gym and they can actually bring in athletes to train with them in the middle of the night, and that's kind of working for them. And that's really cool. A good friend of mine, RJ Ramon, we've been training together. He's up in Jacksonville, about an hour away. But he was all over the state of Florida, but he recently kind of got himself back to Jacksonville and reached out and wanted to train again. And that's what we did this past time. Matter of fact, when we're in Vegas, we still stayed up all night, just walking around the casino all night, just trying to keep our bodies, alive and awake, and staying awake as long as we could, and then boom, try to roll it over for the next day.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. It sounds like a huge element of this sport is just being able to manage the stress of competition day really, really well.
And then they throw you for a loop too. You got to keep your mind, and this is just me, observation. I really kind of look at these details, but they'll put you in an interview and start asking you questions, and then you had a good mindset, and then now all of a sudden you're like thinking about what they asked you, and then you kind of get distracted and you kind of lose your mindset, and then you got to go back through your protocol, things that I've trained up with protocol, trying to find that space again to stay in. So it's really, really, really dynamic that you don't see behind the scenes that I think is quite interesting, because when I tell people about it, they're like, oh man, that's quite interesting. I didn't know that you had to go through that as an athlete and then get on the stage and actually get through that massive obstacle course, It's pretty cool.
100%, man. And you've mentioned the obstacle course and you mentioned your own training a few times that way. For people who maybe haven't seen the show, what are kind of some common obstacles that you might face from a physical standpoint in relation to the show? And how do you go about training for these things, right? Are there specialized gyms, or are you just kind of like making it work out of the CrossFit box? Or what does that actual training for Ninja actually entail?
Dude, great question. I'll give you a quick little evolution, maybe, because when I first started, there were no ninja gyms, right? There were no obstacle specific gyms. there were, a lot of the OCR, which is obstacle racing, like your Spartans, your Savage stuff. That's some people dabbling in that, but the majority of it was just went to a CrossFit gym or you went somewhere and you got creative. And I'll come back to creativity because that's a huge part of our sport and then training. But then, as it evolved, we just kind of went from getting creative in gyms that existed to a ton of backyard ninja courses. That's where it was wild, wild west and fun. All these people who were wanting to get into the sport were just creating this monstrosity in their backyards, whoever was allowed to from HOA perspective or whatnot. I'll never forget this old boy named Mike Cook up in Raleigh, North Carolina. He created something called Backyard Ninja Warrior, and he just expanded it. And he had, I don't know, he had access to like a telephone company or something, but he put in just the most massive, Ninja Warrior course in his backyard. And still to this day, he hosts two money courses, like where you can win good money going to his place and competing. And he moved it a couple times. But so it went from, getting creative, what you can do, to all these backyard ninja facilities that people were trying to train on and get used to doing specific ninja course training. And then now you're in a world where there are high level, high quality, the aluminum truss and everything that looks just like the Ninja Warrior show. There's gyms that you can walk into, become a member and train there. And there's always going to be a pro ninja, two or three pro ninjas that are there, creating the obstacles, running the programming and getting people through it. Kids love it. It's a huge, huge kids activity, birthday parties, things of the sort. In those places, you can train very specific to the Ninja Warrior, show or league, whatever it is you're going to. But the thing about it, and this is where creativity loops back around, is there's never been one course that's the same, right? So unique about ninja and the essence of ninja, every single competition you go to, it's different. There's no standardization, which there are a couple of entities or leagues that are kind of trying to standardize some things to make it, compatible with, international competitions and stuff. That's more on the OCR side. So they are kind of repeating the obstacles. So you would run like a same 100-meter course, the same obstacles over and over. But in the essence of ninja, it's a different course every time. The Ninja Warrior show, American Ninja Warrior, I've never touched the same course twice. It's always something different. So you're training, even in a nice ninja gym, you have to change it up every day and do different movements every time you go train because you want to be good at everything and anything that could be thrown at you. And obviously you find your weak points and you train those weak points and get to a certain standard where you think would be acceptable if you had to face something of that sort. Different movement pools. You could be bad at balance, so you need to hit the balance obstacles more and get creative in the balance side and hit it different ways and stuff like that. So, I mean, everything from rad stuff, like I've seen riding a bull, literally like an obstacle that kind of looked like a bull as it bucked down a track, and you're like, you got to ride something now? It's crazy. Nobody trained riding.
No, no. I mean, I guess has anyone on the show ever like come from a bull riding background? Like that'd be
Oh
an
yeah.
odd transition, but
Yeah. We've had a few cowboys get on there. I think they had somebody who rode in the PBR, the Pro Riding Bull Riding Association. I'm pretty sure a couple guys got on it. You know, they're just grit and tough. They didn't go to like a high level, but they did pretty good. They're just tough.
sounds like, as you mentioned, you have to be ready for pretty much anything since the course is always evolving. And I think that goes back to what we talked about before, where, some people might train for specific obstacles, but what happens when you encounter an obstacle that you've never seen before? Because I'm sure they're always cooking up some new way to, again, throw you off balance a little bit and in the moment that way. So if you're not actually prepared for those things, or you've never trained just a wide diverse array of skills and movements that way, then you might kind of be caught off guard that way. And it seems like, now correct me if this is wrong, but just from an overall physical standpoint, you mentioned reactivity, you mentioned balance, but also just like overall explosiveness in the lower portion of the body in particular. Like I look at that wall that y'all climb up and I'm thinking I have to have a lot of leg drive to get up that thing, in addition to upper body strength, upper body actual like coordination and sequencing, right? Like swinging from one bar to the next and so on that way. And obviously, you mentioned the grip strength as well. Like that's a lot of different physical elements coming together into one sport, almost more than majority of sports that I can think of anyway. You mentioned gymnastics, and I think gymnastics might rival it from an overall demand standpoint, but it's got to be really freaking close.
For instance, gymnastics, variety of different movements, but they are the same ones over and over. I mean, obviously your floor routine is going to be unique and different, but it's tumbling, you got the spring floor and stuff to help you, but then, the events are the same, right? You can continuously train the same events, whereas ninja, you got to diversify and everything's got to be unique and different. I mean, you may take one obstacle, let's say everyone knows the salmon ladder, which is a kind of cool one, right? It's a feature obstacle that does show up again and again per se. The one where you have the bar and you got to get the bar to the next rung or not. It like you clip in and jump with the pipe in your hand. But they've made so many varieties of that one movement that you have to sometimes spin it. You have to then land it in little cups. You have to jump it over and then clip it underneath another one. Like it's just one kind of style, but you hit it in multiple different ways. So you gotta kind of train that all up. And obviously that's explosion and precision because not only now you have to get your body weight up to get the bar release, but then you have to now place it in a certain position to make it actually catch in for the next move, And then your eyes can't split and see two things at once. So then your perception of spatial orientation has to be on point because you can only look at one side and hit that one and hope that the other one's in the right place. So that's really interesting too. And then bringing it back to like the warp wall, I'll never forget my first experience hitting the warp wall. Obviously, couldn't train that. No one has a 14-foot quarter pipe laying around. So I do a lot of service trips overseas too with my, put together medical mission trips. And we were in Ecuador and I got accepted to go on a show and I flew back. It was like 3 a.m. the night before. And then I competed that same night. I think it was in Miami. And I was in Ecuador, kind of going, well, I need to train a little bit while I'm here. We're doing some service work, but I found this like random concrete wall and I was like, well, I should probably run up this thing a couple of times to try it out. And I remember I couldn't get it. And I was kind of like, this is weird. I know I'm fast because I trained to be fast as a pole vaulter. And I was like, I got to figure this out. So I figured out a little technique that instead of like trying to run up the wall, like you got to kind of lean back, lift your chest and take less steps. And sure enough, I got that wall in Ecuador. It was Ecuador. And then I'm on the show. It's kind of drizzling. You can't see that on the when it's filming, you can't see it, but it's like drizzling and everything's wet. And you're like, this is way worse, And I tried it. It took me 3 tries to get that warp wall my first time because the first 2 I was just being like an athlete, like, bah, hit it, like, bah, you got to get it. And then I would just run straight into the wall. And then I realized when I was like about to go again, I was like, oh, the wall in Ecuador, like run up, lift your chest, small, big, powerful, strong steps, but lift up. And I caught the wall like right here. So it was like a technique thing, So you can use power, explosion, and strength for sure. That's going to help. But if you learn kind of a technique and a movement skill, it's amazing how easy some of these obstacles can get. And, for instance, a warp wall, you think you got to have rocket boosters to get up it. But if you learn the right technique and position of your body and where to put your center of gravity as you run up the wall versus running into the wall, you can get a very high warp wall. I mean, we're catching true quarter pipes at like 17, 16, 17 feet now. And then now you got the one on the show that's 18 feet that you can win money if you get to do it. That's a different pitch, as far as the slope isn't just like a true quarter pipe. But those are fun. The other day we had a gym, we almost caught a 20-footer. Like there's a 20-footer in Jacksonville.
That's
It's so
insane.
bad. Yeah.
Wow. And I mean, to your point, it sounds like the more you do these things, the more you kind of think and innovate and find new ways to solve the problems that way. And you really learn by doing these things. It's not just thinking about it or watching it. It's like you actually have to go in there, get your hands a little dirty and do the thing, so to speak, that way. Is there anything else that you've learned throughout your competition career with Ninja Warrior that way and your training history that way that, you wish you knew when you kind of started off that way first season?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much. Wow. And hats off to the ninja community, before I answer this, because I mean, I'd say I'm in the movement science space and I'm, let's just say I dabble in it and I help people move better, but I'm a physical therapist, and they have gotten so creative and they've figured out so many things just by doing what you said. They've gotten in these gyms, they've gotten themselves in the space, and they figure out these things that I'm like, man, I never would have thought of that. For instance, the sport is kind of evolving into some head-to-head racing where you actually have to now go fast versus just getting through the obstacle. You have to do it fast because you're competing against someone who's right next to you, which is exciting as a viewer. Like, it's super fun to watch whenever they're racing each other. But now you have to do these movements where, let's take a lache, for instance, meaning like you jump from one thing to the other with your hands, you grab it. And normally you could, kind of kick back, swing, get some momentum, and sling to the next one. Well, now you can't do that. Meaning if you catch something and take the time to swing back and then throw again, the person that you're competing against has already gone to 3 obstacles ahead of you because they link it together. Like, they keep moving forward. And, we figured out one way to do it where when you throw to that obstacle, you have to catch the obstacle in front of you and get your center of mass behind you so that you can continuously swing through it. Well, that was like, oh, that's genius. That's pretty cool because you keep momentum going forward as you kind of, it's like a sinusoidal wave as you're going through it. Now they figured out a way, which is super athletic. You got to be a really good athlete to do it. But that's what the high-end athletes are doing, is that they kick forward and they get their hips in front of the obstacle, but then they just keep kicking their feet forward. So there is no downswing again. They just keep popping like that through the courses. And it's hard to explain until you see it. And now that I'm talking about it and you see them doing it on the show, you're going to go, oh, that's what he's talking about. They figured how to do. You have to train for hours to figure it out in the gym, to actually get that movement and that pop and snap that saves 0.2, 0.3 seconds, off of your time. But that's the difference between moving on in the bracket and not moving on in the bracket, because if that person that you're competing against has that movement figured out, you're not, they're going to be ahead of you. And, within 2 obstacles, they'll be 2 seconds ahead of you, which is massive. And, the way it's going now, but it really is cool and unique how they figure that out. And I come from the mindset of, okay, you're doing these things now. How can I best supplement cross training and everything like that to make you not get injured, for one, to do that, to keep you competing. And then 2, make that movement more powerful, more explosive, more, coordinated and all that stuff. That's where my mind continuously is thinking. I should be in the forefront creating the moments, but I'm not. They're so creative. They create the motions. And then I'm thinking about, okay, how can I either make it better or stop them from getting hurt? Or, even myself, because it's cool because I relate it all to myself because I'm trying to do it too, So
Right.
it's easier. As an athlete, I think, you mentioned earlier how, professionals kind of don't quite grasp what athletes need to do. There's no doubt. I mean, being the athlete yourself is hands down the best way to learn to rehab someone or coach someone through it, is if you are the athlete, you know what they're going through.
Right, get in the trenches yourself that way. But, perhaps like maybe you're like me and you live in middle of nowhere, Maryland, and there's no Ninja Warrior gyms around that way. What kind of things do you feel are essential for the sports med clinician or, the rehab professional, whatever term you want to throw at it that way, to know about working with the ninja athlete that way, or even taking it a step further, right? Like, say they take our advice and they start doing some like GPP blocks or something like that. What should that strength coach or trainer know about programming for that athlete trying to do ninja that way?
A really good question. And where I would begin is, it is, we've already mentioned there's a very unique dynamic. There's so many elements to what an obstacle course ninja would need. Where I would start is that, the grip strength and the fingertip explosion. So a bar grip is great, and you should definitely start there, but you need to progress to getting into more endurance in different holds, because you got to hold round balls, you got to hold cones, you got to hold lips, you got to hold, big round structures, even bear hugging. So one, work on different variety of gripping, see what their neural output is, and where you need to work on that. Explosion is a big one, from the legs and the upper extremity. I love, when you don't have a ninja course, things like pull-up claps. I mean, that's not a big one that a lot of athletes do per se, but you need to be able to do 10 to 15, if not 20 pull-up claps in some of these obstacles. It's an endurance thing as well as an explosion. You got to keep that explosion going and going, and take that into a fun game. So like, you might be doing pull-up claps, but if you're just doing it in one position, that's not that's the start, but make them kind of go side to side on the bar, hit targets as they go up. Like they might pull up and slap a target up above them and then get back to the bar. That fast hand and eye coordination aspect to it. So add the explosion in with coordination training and reaction speed. And I do think that you got to be careful with over strengthening or overloading an athlete, because a lot of, us ninja folks are trying to stay as light as we can. There's not enough research out there, and I think that would be a great study to do. But I've trained and I've helped others train with a little bit of overload principle, like add 5 pounds, 6 pounds max to your body while you're going through some obstacle courses, which doesn't relate to your question. But as you're doing this type of training, you kind of overload a little bit, not every day, but some days you put some weight on you. That way, whenever you get to a competition, you take off that 5 pounds, you feel that much stronger in the competition per se. So there's those principles, but I don't think a ninja needs to be doing a ton of deadlifts, a ton of, I think Olympic lifting is fantastic if you get that explosion, but I don't think you need to do heavy stuff, because if you increase muscle mass, you increase weight, which makes this a little bit more challenging on their body to do the actual sport. So there's a happy medium, like get strong, but try not to gain weight, if that's helpful in any capacity.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it comes back to, how you define strength, so to speak, that way, right? Because if you define strength based off of bench squat deadlift, like a traditional powerlifting thing, yeah, it might not carry over the best to ninja per se. But if you define strength as force through the ground or force through the hands that way, there's a lot of different ways to train that. And I think that's where, we talk all the time about this return to sport versus return to performance problem that we see plaguing so many athletes where, plain and simple, they get cleared for sport, but, they're not actually at the level that they want to be that way. How do we bridge that gap? And I think some of those things that you mentioned can help a lot, right? Moving fast with intent, adding reactive elements to it. But the other piece I would say too, you mentioned like the Olympic lifts and different things that way. I don't like to think about things as heavy or lightweight on the bar. I like to think, how quick can we move it? Is it
Velocity.
fast or is it slow, right?
Mhm.
So, it might be a relatively quote unquote heavy weight, but if they can move it fast, I'm okay with that. And I'm willing to take some time and add that to our training block that way. And the other piece that I think is really essential to note too is you can train quote unquote heavy loads. You can also train high set count, low rep count, and not necessarily get super, super bulky. It just comes back to the balance that you strike within your training program. Also, what do you do when you're not training the rest of the day that way? Because, if you train hard and heavy and then you take the next day off and you're not really like eating in a massive calorie surplus, like I've worked with guys different times that are pulling in 2 to 3,000 calories a day above what they need for maintenance. Like they're trying to gain, but if you're not doing those things, you're actually able to improve that actual strength without really packing on a ton of unwanted weight that way, I would say.
No, I agree. And then I think there's an element of which you mentioned, what do you do for your cross training? What do you do for your rehab
Hmm.
to to flush out and kind of recover from, said whatever training routine. And one simple thing that I tell a lot of, ninja athletes that, it's kind of been a cheat code is you don't need to do these. I got the fancy rehab protocols that I can hand you or, work through with you and all that stuff. But on like 2 or 3 times a week, you should probably do some swimming. And I think swimming is a good way to kind of just go through that whole rotator cuff and the whole system that you're using. You're fluttering your legs and everything. And it kind of gives you a good little flush recovery. So that's a big part of the protocol is some type of cross training that's going to, get you in a zone 2, zone 3, where you're flushing out all those metabolites that you're not trying to get bulky per se. That will help you recover as well as get you better off for the next training session.
That's a great point, is it's always that never-ending challenge and that even evolution of training, if you will, too. Like I like to do things consistently over and over again. I would say 80% of the time, right? You got to do them again if you want to get better at them, but I like to leave that other 10 to 20% open for just kind of like explore movement, do different things. That's where I think, I mentioned Instagram earlier, and I'm not a fan of a lot of the things that I see there, but I'm willing to try pretty much anything. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but if I try it and I like it, yeah, maybe it earns the right in my program somewhere, but I'd rather try something new every single day
Yeah.
than just stay in this like fixed line of thinking, if you will.
And I mean, it's really cool because the Instagram, you got to give it credit because of the creativity, and that's what gets the dopamine response. It's seeing something new, novel. Yeah, fair enough. But I think if you get back to the truth and the raw, boring fundamentals are gonna get you pretty dang far. But it's getting creative within those fundamentals that really help you in this sport particularly, because you do have to change the obstacles out and everything like that. One thing I do want to just kind of mention too that is maybe not going to be thought of as much. Well, no, I think they would think of it, but when you're training an athlete and you may not have access to obstacles, or if you are, able to train in the gym, remember to do like counter movements or antagonist movements.
Mm.
I think that's a big thing I see, when athletes in the ninja sport do get injured, typically overuse. Typically, they're training the same way over and over again. They don't really ever do any presses above head. It's always a pull, right? And it's always grip. They don't ever work on extension. And the reverse motions I think need to be thrown in more than you would imagine, just to get your nervous system dialed in right to avoid breaking down tissues and things of that sort. So a couple times a week for myself, even, I throw in like we just all line up and start practicing handstand push-ups and just variety of things. Just do the reverse motions. We used to do a lot of rope climbing in for ninja training because there was the stage 4 Mount Midoriyama, the 80-foot rope climb. That would destroy a lot of people, and I think rope climbing will get you strong in a well versatile way, but you're constantly pulling, so you need to do a reverse motion of that to kind of get yourself stronger there, but also recover better there too. So that I would throw that one on the list too, just like I mentioned, close up. Rope climbing is a fantastic if you don't have a gym. So, and just swinging on that rope is fantastic, back and forth, swing on as long as you can, stuff like that.
As you mentioned too, you mentioned the word injury there. What kind of injuries have you either experienced yourself or seen other people face in the ninja sport that way? Because I'd imagine it's a little bit different than your, typical field sport athlete that way, if you will.
Well, again, it's a diverse sport. You got to do all kind of different motions. So I have seen all kind of different type of injuries. It's you name it, it's probably going to be there in the sport that it's happened. But typical, your higher your ranking ones are your shoulder injuries. That's where people get hurt. Elbows, just from over gripping and things of that sort. Achilles, right? The warp wall has been kind of coined, the elderly man, Achilles heel, because so many, older adults walk into a ninja gym and see the warp wall and they're like, dang, I want to try that. And they don't warm up, they're not trained, they're not conditioned, and then they hit the wall and either tweak or, God forbid, blow their Achilles out. There's plenty of documented cases of ruptured Achilles trying to go up a warp wall. So if you are watching and you're not conditioned, don't just go hit a warp wall. That's something you probably should work on first. But I personally have pretty big injuries from Ninja Warrior. I was actually up in the place where I just mentioned, the backyard ninja up in North Carolina. I went to a competition there, and we were working through the course, stage 1, stage 2, and it was on stage 3, and I qualified for it. And I, as a physical therapist, I saw the obstacle and what they wanted us to do. And it was a kind of a cross grip type thing where you had to jump, but you were internally rotated and you had to like catch a lip like this. And when I saw it, I was like, that is not good for your shoulders. And I was like, you know what? And I told my buddy, I said, if I get to that obstacle, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to, it's not worth it. I'm going to bow out. Well, I get to that obstacle, the adrenaline's flowing, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna give it a shot. Well, I actually dislocated my shoulder out the bottom and fractured my shoulder socket, pulled the labrum off with it. So it was a bony back heart for the people out there that know what that is. I fractured it out the bottom, pulled the labrum off with it, and I had a lift off tear of the top part of my rotator cuff, the supraspinatus. It pulled it off. So, that was a massive surgery, and I, had to repair my left side and recover from that. But I came back from the sport, found a great surgeon, he put me back together. I rehabbed myself with my colleagues at the university. We had a great time, documented it and everything. And then 4 years later, I did the exact same thing on the right shoulder, but I was wakeboarding, and it was a whole nother story that involves a gator and a knife and all kind of funny stuff. But I did the same injury on this side, put the bones back together, put the labrum back together, put the rotator cuff back together. This side, I lost my biceps or detached the biceps, which I'm happy about. I wish I would have let go of the bicep on this side. We should have cut it and replaced it. Looking back, if that was something I would have redone, I would have done it here because the biceps is like the appendix of the shoulder. You don't need that long head of the biceps. If you got a chance to get rid of it, I personally would get rid of it, but I'm sure there's a debate on that. Recovered on, both of these. Now I'm back competing, new shoulders. But a lot of athletes struggle with that. But a good quick fix, as a rehab professional trying to work someone through these, AC compression injuries, just slamming it over and over time. It's just offload that rotator cuff, get them opened up, get them strong on the posterior chain, getting the D2 flexions and stuff going. That'll really hope, open them up from the cross training or the intense training of pulling and all that. Stick a needle in the infraspinatus posterior delt. That really goes a long ways for most athletes too. If you have that needle training, or use your thumb, use some kind of tool, release that posterior rotator cuff and stretch that posterior capsule. A lot of times it gets kind of, pulled forward and it gets irritated in the front, biceps tendon and everything. So those are your common, just general irritations that these athletes get if they're not doing a good job of balancing out their routine and doing their rehab, doing their, counter activities and stuff like that. You'll probably need to be doing that with those athletes.
That's such a great point. And it's so interesting you mentioned like the needle and the infra and post delt because we did a few podcasts with Angela Gordon in the past. And every single time she brings up posterior capsule and trigger points in infra, post delt, and I think upper trap as well. And a lot of times when I get acute shoulders that way, that's one of the things we throw out there is just addressing the soft tissue and the capsular restrictions. And it's incredible how quickly a lot of them get better by just addressing some of those simple things that way. I'm not reinventing the wheel by any means, but those simple things go a long way. And it's crazy to hear the injuries that you've had, but also being able to look now at all that you're able to do despite what you've been through that way. And I think that's the kind of thing that people need to hear more of. Is a lot of times they're hit with this news about major injury, surgery, and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, I'm done." And it's like, no, you can come back. The body is resilient. It just takes a lot of work. And at some point, we'll have to catch up more on that wakeboarding story because I've been wakeboarding for about 12 years, and I tell you right now, the water sports, they torch you. There's nothing quite like water skiing, wakeboarding. Like you try and do a long run, my goodness. Or like I used to think I was athletic, and then I tried to jump on a essentially aqua snowboard pulled by a boat, and I felt like an absolute narp all over again. So there's a lot of good stuff in that water sports realm as well.
There is. There's good carryover there too to the ninja. There's some plenty of wakeboarders that actually transitioned over too.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. But Todd, as we start to wrap up, is there anything we missed or any other kind of closing thoughts that you might have about our conversation today, man?
No, I think it's good. I mean, I come at it from a little bit of a rehab perspective because that's my background. That's what I do. It's just such a unique sport. You don't really kind of see it from all the angles, and I just hope that I kind of open the opportunity for someone to see this sport as, wow, this is a very unique athlete, and I need to think of creative ways to do it because they are, as an athlete, it requires them to be creative in every movement they do and change it up all the time. So it's, as a rehab professional, it's a little bit challenging to chase that creativity, but I think it's really fun and rewarding whenever you see someone train up and become better, and then or they have an injury, you get them out of that injury and they're back on the stage competing. I'd love for you to be able to talk to some of the actually, premier athletes and get their perspective and what they do. Because again, I might be a rehab professional, but they are the forefront of the sport and they're creating things as they go. They're finding their own ways, even without, people helping them like myself. And I think it's worthwhile to hear them talk about it and what they figured out on their own.
Yeah, 100%, man. I'd love to make that happen. But I think you're pretty incredible in yourself, Todd. And for people who want to find out more about you and all the amazing things you're doing, whether that be Ninja Warrior or physical therapy or teaching and beyond that way, where can they find you at?
Man, I'm all over the place, but I got a couple things. I got a Con Ed company that I'm starting up, so it's in the process of building, but it's called Primal Labs. We're gonna offer, kind of just dry needling course series. We got, soft tissue stuff, manipulation stuff, cognitive stuff, psychologically informed practice. So I'm building that platform out, and if you want to learn and get some Con Ed in there, and again, I'm opening my market is to try to do exactly what you're doing with a variety of professionals. I don't want to stick with just physios. I want chiros, acupuncturists, strength coaches, and anyone who wants to learn this stuff to make humans better. I welcome it. There's also a new platform that's launching as we speak. It's going live on the Apple Store now. It's called Zala. It's just a nice, if you are a medical provider and you want to, kind of better manage your clients, you can sign up on it. Your clients can come on board with you, and you can, track them better. Your client's wearable can connect to it. You can see their sleep. You can have them track stuff if you want to, and it's just really cool. And you can offer subscription packages versus a time for service type thing. So it's a different way maybe to manage it, and it's not your typical insurance based track. It's more cash based subscription model. I think it could be something really cool for practitioners out there to go about their business in a different way, or that provide their services in a different way. And if any practitioners are actually interested in, I'm going to selfishly plug this because it's really cool, in doing international medical mission trips.
Mhm.
I'll give you my email. I don't know if you want to plug it in or whatnot. That's probably the best way to just reach out to me. And you want to join one of the trips, we typically do like a surf and serve type theme where we, surf every morning and then go treat every day or something like that. If you're interested in doing some kind of, charity events, then I think you should reach out to me, and I'll put you on an email list and let you know what we're putting together because it's super cool.
Yeah, that's incredible work you're doing there, man. I love that. We'll link to all of that in the description below. Your email, we'll link to the Primal Labs, we'll link to your Instagram, all that stuff too. That way, if people didn't quite catch that, they can just click there and see all the incredible stuff you're up to, Todd. This was really amazing, and I appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, no, I'm stoked to be here, dude. I'm glad you reached out, and thanks to, like you said, Jim. That's a good circle right there for me, man. Warms my heart to hear from that guy.